if you guys can't tell, we're a little amped up about this new series today. Something about that name. Man, well, first I want to introduce myself. I'm not used to not being up here at all before I preach, but if this is your first time here, my name is Zach Leiner, and I'm a lead pastor here at Cultivate, and it is a pleasure and an honor that I can't put into words to have the opportunity to lead this church and to be a part of this church, honestly. If you are new here, maybe you don't know. If you've been here the last couple of weeks, you might have heard last week, in place of a Sunday service, we held a service Sunday, and we got together right here. We packed over 200 care bags, and then we went into Clover and we handed out around 150 meals to our community in need. And that's something, it's celebratory. You guys clap at the weirdest times and then you miss it when it needs to land. We gotta practice, man. We need some signs. Somebody put a single so the people watching online think that you're actually listening. But no, it was a cool opportunity for us to come together and to really do something special. You know, it's common for people to come into church and wonder what they're going to get out of it. It's an entirely different thing if you take a look at the Word of God and realize the church isn't for us, right? The gospel is good news that we're to receive and pass on. And last week we saw parents, grandparents, children, even my young kids, preschoolers in here, filling out notes, helping parents pack bags, and really giving back and serving together. You know, as we were in Clover, we had most of the kids packing up the bags with the fruit and the chips and the drinks and handing them to people and letting them know that they're seen, they're known, and they're loved, right? That's something that you're not gonna learn in a classroom. You can read your Bible all you want, but until you put it into practice, those words are just empty. And I'm honored to be a part of a community that does this willingly, does it excitedly, and has people asking when we're gonna do it again. So I want you guys to know we're planning April's 5th Sunday already, so be on the lookout. Any month with 5 Sundays, we're gonna do something to serve our city, and man, I'm excited for it, because that's what church is all about, right? It's not to come and fill ourselves up on coffee, music, and a message, and to sit back and say, what you got for me today, preacher man, right? Anytime someone says they come to church and they leave feeling unfulfilled or feeling that they leave hungry and they're not being fed, it's not because the word isn't there, it's because you're not digesting it properly. I can give it to you, you can chew it up, but if you spit it back out, hey Colton, give it up for Colton. Colton wasn't done playing. It's okay. I'd rather listen to him play than me preach anyways. I can pass you the word, but if you chew it up, spit it out, and don't do anything with it, it's going to leave you hungry. But what we intend to do here is we intend to fully digest the good news of Jesus and to take it with us and fulfill our call as followers of Jesus to shine our light into a dark and hurting world, right? To spread the name of the Lord all to the ends of the earth and to help others find their God-given purpose in a world that I think so desperately needs that, right? I think that's one of the most impactful things that the church can do for the world. You know, in a culture that often makes you feel overlooked, forgotten, non-essential, it's for us to remind them that they're seen and they're known by the creator of the universe and they're loved beyond belief. Aren't you guys thankful today that God sees you? Aren't you thankful today that God knows and values you? And aren't you thankful today that God looked at humanity while we were still lost and drowning in our sin and decided we were worth more than just saving? We were worth enough to bankrupt heaven so that we could experience redemption and pass it on from generation to generation. Can we bring my microphone down just a bit? It feels a little boomy. Thank you. I was just watching a YouTube video where they were making fun of pastors that do that. I'm really sorry. But it's distracting myself. Yeah, that was weird. But isn't that good news for us today? That God sees us, God knows us, and God gave his son for us. It's great news. We talk about it often. We share that news often. And I think many times we expect that to be enough to change someone's opinion on what church is all about, right? But there's something that I've come to realize as I've had conversations and I've spoken to people and I've heard their questions of faith, questions of purpose. And I want to let you guys know I'm just as guilty as the next person, but church often says things like we serve and worship a God that wants genuine relationship with us, right? We talk about a personal faith that we can call our own. We talk about being seen and known by the Most High God, right? But I think one of the most basic elements of an introduction is missing throughout the process. God knows our name, but we rarely ask for his. I know that might sound a little strange for us to think about from that perspective, but just stick with me for a second. For those who haven't yet experienced God's presence, God's provision, God's goodness, making a decision to pursue a God that you can't even identify is pretty intimidating. Many of us come here week to week, and I think we might struggle to identify exactly who the God we worship is. And it got me thinking, you certainly wouldn't pursue a relationship with someone if you didn't even know their name. First thing I said to Vanessa when I met her is, hey, it's nice to meet you. What's your name? What followed there was an absolute travesty that she regrets to this day. But I'm telling you, I wouldn't enter into a business relationship with someone without knowing their name. I'm probably not alone here. I wouldn't eat food or take a sip of a drink if I don't know who made it and what it's called, right? Take a bite, try it. You don't need to worry about what it is. That's how I know it's roadkill, right? I don't eat food at country people's house. Like if you make something and don't tell me clearly what it is, I'm not coming over. I'm gonna be honest, that's what scares me about meal trains. Just confessions of a pastor. I don't know what you're putting in that mystery meat, and I don't want it. Clearly identify what ingredients are in that dish. It's funny to think about, right? The unnamed, the unknown, the unidentifiable. But it's sad when you consider that many come to church expecting to find intimate, transformative relationships with God without actually knowing who God truly is. I think we're hoping and searching for intimacy, but instead we often find hollow imitations. Because without knowing who God is, you'll never know who God isn't. Without recognizing the truth and the power that the name carries, we often settle for man-made substitutes that leave us hoping and longing with more desperation than we came with in the first place. And I think it's because of this lack of identification and this lack of true knowedness that many have bought into the lies that we all worship the same God, right? We all just have our own ways of doing it. Maybe you've heard all roads lead north. I've heard some go as far as to say the word God only means a higher power. So when anyone says they believe in God or they believe in a God, they believe in a higher power, and it's all the same thing. We all want the same thing, right? As I heard this and as I really started to look into some of these conversations, you can look them up on YouTube. It's heartbreaking. As I began to look through it and I began to have conversations, I wept, seeing that people who would follow Jesus their lives would willingly question and then buy into the lie that all gods are the same God. Little g or big G. You guys know I'm an emotional guy, so this isn't the kind of weeping that I do when I watch a Hallmark movie. That's ugly crying, that's controllable and done by choice, right? Cry into my macchiato, that way it becomes a salted caramel macchiato. It's cheaper that way. I don't know how it works. This weeping was utter brokenness in my soul as I looked around and I saw Judges 2 playing out before my eyes. Some of you guys in here, you heard me preach a message like 4 years ago, maybe, my first message in Lake Wiley, where I talked about the importance of remembering and passing on the stories of what God's done in our lives from generation to generation. But for those who haven't heard that story, let's refresh for a minute. And it starts in the book of Joshua, chapter 4. After crossing the Jordan River, the Israelites camped out in Gilgal, and Joshua told them to pile up 12 stones as a monument. And in verse 21, Joshua says to the Israelites, "In the future, your children will ask, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you can tell them, 'This is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it dry until you were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea when it dried up and all who crossed over. He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so that you might fear the Lord your God forever." God gave clear instructions to his people after once again delivering them, saving them, and fulfilling his promise. Clear instructions that they were to put up a monument so they could remember and never forget his name. But just one book over in Judges chapter 2, it says the Israelites served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the leaders who outlived him. Those who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Catch this. But after that generation died, another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things he'd done for Israel. They had abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt, and they went after other gods, worshiping the gods of the people around them, and they angered the Lord. We're talking a generation. From one generation to the next, God's given instructions on leaving a monument for the deliverance that they walked in and saw with their own eyes. Yet the children and grandchildren behind them didn't even speak the name. So I've titled today's message, "Remember the Name." I think some might say I'm being a little dramatic with this, but I don't believe that I am when I say that I think we're on the verge of seeing history repeat itself right before our eyes. I remember when I was a kid, and I know times have changed, but I remember being in church every time the doors were open. And they were open a lot more often than churches are open these days. I think for me, I had a choice. I could either become a pastor or become a heathen, because I was either over-churched or I didn't know anything but church. I tried a little bit of both, but I settled on pastor. So I think I'm doing all right. But I remember seeing families pray together. I remember saying under God in schools and it not being taboo. I remember when Sundays were sacred even for school districts. But now, rather than revering the day and setting it aside for the Lord, Sundays have turned into just another day for games and performances. I know I probably appear far too young to sound like the crotchety old man that I might sound like right now. But I firmly believe that the lack of recognition as to who our God truly is has led to many either not caring to find out or searching for answers on their own and finding fulfillment elsewhere. Looking around at the world and what's happening, I began to realize that everything going on in the world right now led me to a place where I had no other options but to start our year out with a series to clear up any confusion. So over the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at the different names of God throughout the Bible so that we can understand not just the identity of our God, but we can get to know the heart of a God who looked at us and loved us so much that he sent his only son to die a sinner's death so that we could be forgiven. You guys with me today? We tracking? All right, cool. I heard somebody say that in a sermon. We tracking? I don't know what it meant. but he sounded official when he said it. So I figured I'd try it out. It didn't feel right coming off the tongue. But to gain a little understanding, we're going to jump in all the way back in the book of Exodus, and we're going to look at one of the more familiar stories of the Bible where a man by the name of Moses has a strange encounter with a bush that's on fire. It's engulfed, but it's not burning. You can imagine Moses is curious as any of us might be. So he goes and he takes a closer look. In verse 4, it says, when the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. The Lord warned, do not come any closer and take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I heard the cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. And then things get a little interesting. He says, now go, for I'm sending you to the Pharaoh, and you must lead my people out of Egypt. A little backstory on why that's especially difficult for Moses. Moses was born a Hebrew, but Pharaoh decided he wanted to get rid of the babies, the Israelite babies. So Moses' mother placed him in a basket, lined it with tar, pushed him down the river. Moses ended up, of all places, to wind up right there at the Pharaoh's daughter as she was out in the river. And he was raised in the Pharaoh's house. He was raised by an Egyptian, knowing he was Hebrew, and he wrestled with this tension until he one day saw the oppression, saw one of the Israelites being abused, and took up for him and ended up murdering one of the slave drivers before running off and ending up in exile. It's a lot to unpack there for Moses, but you could imagine after wandering, going from living in a palace to winding up in a pasture, you can imagine what's happening internally as God tells Moses, hey, I'm the God of your ancestors, the ones that you really don't know that much about, and I'm calling you to go back to the place where you fled, where you've been hiding from, and tell the people who took your people to let them go. Right? Moses is looking at God and he's got to be saying, why me? Right? God, I think you got the wrong guy. I'm not that dude. This seems like something beyond my skill set. Thanks for the offer, but I think I'm going to have to pass. He continues and he says to God, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors sent me, they'll ask me, what's his name? What should I tell them? And this is one of the most jumbled up verses that I've heard preached through and taught over the years. But God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. My name to remember for all generations. I've got to admit, I'm embarrassed to stand before you today and admit that I haven't used God's preferred name nearly often enough from this platform. And I'm even more heartbroken as I consider around the world there are many piling into churches, millions lifting up the name of the Lord and giving into that worship leader cliche, give God a shout of praise, right? They're giving a shout of praise, yet I think many haven't a clue that the God we say we've given our lives to could ever truly be known by name on a personal level. Yahweh. The way the Israelites heard it for years actually sounded like this. It was Ehia Asher Ehia, which in Hebrew means I am who I am. Ehia means I am. And when Moses said, how can I say it? He says, I am or I will be. Tell them that he is, he will be. And that's such a unique wording, but in their culture, they had a deep understanding as to what it would have meant. See, over time, Israelites had such a reverence and such a desire to keep the name of God sacred and to keep it pure that after they would read through it, rather than speaking the name of the Lord aloud, they used the Hebrew word Adonai, which meant Lord. Over time, they had such a reverence that their reverence became a crutch, and the name of Yahweh became lost in translation over the years. As we began translating through languages, Adonai, meaning Lord, eventually was just taken as Lord, which means master. And many times where the word intended to speak of God by name, we simply called him a master rather than calling him the I am. I think it's a great sentiment. I know their hearts were probably right, trying to keep his name pure. But the problem that many have come to find is that through the years, that background wasn't explained thoroughly. Many took the name of God to just be God, right? Like the name brand drink, like cola. He wasn't Coke, he was just cola by the time we got him. And as a result, I think the power released when you speak the name of Yahweh has been tucked away for years and forgotten about. But that wasn't always the case. The Israelites that I spoke of earlier in Joshua and Judges, I can guarantee you they knew the name. Both the generation before and the generation that followed. But when the name loses its significance and we minimize God's identity, the void in our heart that should be home to a holy reverence has the opportunity to be overrun with cheap fillers and empty promises. As a result, generic God has been replaced with anything else we find slightly more personal. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. The name of God, Yahweh. It's mentioned 6,800 times in the Bible. It's 6,800. That's a lot of times for us to look over it. Along with other descriptions of his character and other ways to identify his works and his presence. You see, many times we see in the pages of the word that those who call on the name of the Lord, to lift up with a shout the name of our God. It's not because he likes to hear his name called. It's because he knows the power and the authority that comes with that faith-filled declaration. When we call on his name, we recognize its meaning. We remember his character. When we lift up the name of Yahweh, he's worshiped and he's honored. But when we cease to call the name of the Lord, he becomes less personal. We grow detached, and often without notice, we simply walk away. We'll see throughout the course of this series that God does have other names, ascriptions given to him as people observed and experienced his character and his presence. We've got descriptions of not only who he is, but also what he does. But as we make our way through this series, I want us to remember the name Yahweh. Because every other name that is spoken builds upon that and speaks to it. Even the name of Jesus, Yeshua, it means Yahweh saves. His name pointed to the truth. You know, I've heard preachers fumble this teaching as they try to make their way through the translation of the I ams and the I will be's. So I want to try my best to make this clear without sounding critical or like a know-it-all, because I promise you there's a lot I don't know. But when God says I am, this is a deeply profound revelation. It's not God trying to be cute or coy when he says, I am who I am. I will be who I will be. That's not like when parents say, stop it because I said so. There's no smugness or arrogance. God wasn't hoping that Moses could crack the code and solve the riddle. I am who I am is the name that God speaks because it gives light to his sustained presence from generation to generation. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. I am who I was. I am what is next. The God of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, never changing, never wavering, never abandoning or failing his children. Is that good news for somebody today? You guys are awfully quiet. I hope you're saving volume for next week. Sunday morning, not Sunday night, because none of you are Eagles fans. Got a couple over here. Yeah. I am who I am. That's God's declaration that he is fully self-sufficient, lacking and wanting nothing. I will be who I will be is a promise that regardless of time, space, or behaviors, regardless of social climates, cancel culture, acceptance, or rejection, his character will never change. Come on, somebody. He was before we were, and he will be for eternity. Yahweh is the name that is seared upon our hearts. It's a promise of continual, active presence and relationship that will never give up or walk out on us. I know there are many, even some here today, who have been hurt by people claiming to represent God. And I know this is something that we don't like to talk about, but people who've been hurt by people representing the church, and I can tell you from my own experience that there is no hurt quite like church hurt. Not only because this should be the place where we come for safety and shelter, but because the misrepresentation of God's divine character, when people act in that way, pollutes our perspective each time we experience it. But I want to make things clear this morning. The pain that you may have felt, the brokenness or the judgment that you may have experienced through any of this, that's not God. That's the result of humanity's attempt to fill in the blanks ourselves when we recognize that there's a longing to speak the name in our hearts, but we don't have the name to speak. We started this year with 3 weeks of intentional prayer, and I shared with you guys that my word for the year is deeper. I want us to go into the unknown, and I want us to see and experience God. Get to know Yahweh in a fresh, unfamiliar way. And I think that knowing the power behind this beautiful name is a step in the right direction. Because I think that too often we struggle to catch the significance of Yahweh, because our perspectives have shifted so much from generation to generation to generation. Remember, God said, my name is to be remembered for all generations. But what I've come to find is that a lot of churches have shifted to this self-help, motivational tone so that people can leave feeling encouraged and ready to take on the world ahead of them, regardless of what they may face. Yet we forget to mention that the obstacle that they're facing has no choice but to bow down before the name of the I am. We're motivating people to take on something they are not called to take on. It's time for the church to stand up and remind those around us that shining our light doesn't mean shining the light, hey, look what God did in me. It's, hey, look what God did for me. Look what God did through me. Look what God can do with me. Because when he is with me, when he is for me, nothing can be against me. But I am not the I am. That's the importance. Encouragement is great, but our faith is not built on independence or self-sufficiency. It's found in the only one who is self-sufficient. The one who was and will be forever and ever. As I look through here, this name of Yahweh, and the band can come on up, this exchange between God and Moses, the rescue and the exodus that it led to, it's all so great, and it's remembered and it's taught on. But I think it speaks to the truth that it's only when we surrender ourselves and allow him to lead us that the promise speaks to our purpose, and that our potential leads to reality. And it's only when we surrender ourselves to be led by him that our insecurity can lead to victory. You might be looking at your life this morning and tears fill your eyes as you look at what you're up against, wondering how you're going to get through whatever's next. God, I see the bills piling up, and the money coming in doesn't line up with what's going out. Lord, I've done all I can, but I can't seem to find a way to fix what's been broken. God, I'm losing faith. I'm losing hope. God, I feel like I'm out of options. You might be looking at your life today saying, I'm not able to put these pieces back together. God, I don't know what to do. I'm not ready for this. But hear me. With the same breath that spoke the earth into motion, the words that delivered Moses are penetrating our hearts today as God leans in and he whispers, I know, but I am. I'm not strong enough to face what's before me. I know, but I am. God, I'm not qualified, and I never will be. I know, but I am, and I will be. God, I'm not worthy. I am. I'm not, you fill in the blank. We've all walked in here carrying our own wounds, carrying our own needs and insecurities. We've all walked in here this morning carrying something with us, whether it be a chip on our shoulder or a hole in our heart. But there's something inside all of us that's tearing at the seams, longing for fulfillment, longing to be pieced back together, longing to be embraced. But there's something inside of us that doesn't know how. God's leaning in and he's whispering, I will be what you need me to be, and I will always be what you need. Across this room this morning, I want you guys to remember as we close out the service that when the world feels out of control, God remains in control. When things feel out of touch, when things feel disconnected, God has never been closer to you than he is in that moment. When everything feels like it's falling apart, the walls are caving in, the floor is running away from you, the roof is ripped off the building. Nothing seems permanent. Nothing seems certain. God's whispering to your heart this morning that he is, he was, and he will be forever. Would you pray with me?